días, caballeros. Aquí el canal Puro Chapín, inglés en barreras. Aquí estamos en los Estados Unidos, lo que sea. Hoy día es lo que deberías saber de políticos, pero no sabes. Vamos a estar leyendo en inglés para mejorar nuestro inglés. The Economy, Chapter 2. Voy a estar empezando en esta página aquí, 35. The economy is perennially one of the voters' top issues, but very few of us fully grasp how specific economic indicators such as the value of the dollar or the amount of the national debt affect our everyday lives. Few of us know about how a politician's views on such indicators are relevant to us, even though the decisions that politicians and officials make about interest rates, taxes, and government spending are critical to our personal economic reality. Not to mention the nation's future. The economy is so big, complicated, and variable that it's often hard to see the big picture. We tend to focus on specific issues such as tax cuts or the subprime mortgage crises. But it's important to recognize that the economy is a complex system in which one policy can have multiple, even contradictory effects, and that there aren't necessarily fixes for economic problems. Pundits often liken the economy to a patient. Some maladies can be cured, but for others, all you can do is address the symptoms and wait it out. Either way, there's always the possibility that the medicine's side effects will do more damage than the initial complaints. Since there's no way to test specific economic policies except to enact them. Even published PhDs with expensive computers and proprietary statistical software don't fully understand what effects various policies really have. So keep in mind that any economic debate is always somewhat theoretical. Plus, economists themselves are politicized, and a lot of economic talk is really just ideology veneered by analysis. The economy creates strange political bedfellows and reflects major ideological shifts. For one thing, policies such as deficit spending and economic intervention advocated by Democrats and strongly opposed by Republicans in the early 20th century eventually caught on, so that by the 1960s, Republicans supported some formerly liberal economic ideas. However, conservative views about managing the deficit and debt that were touted by Republicans during the 1980s were more commonly held by Democrats in the 1990s and 2000s. But recently, more Republicans have been returning to the fiscal conservative fold. The American economy is often compared to a pie. We want to make a bigger pie, or we want a bigger slice of the pie. President George W. Bush once memorably asserted that we need to make the pie higher. But in banking, as in baking, there's such a thing as perfect temperature. The government manages the economy to shield it from the major fluctuations. An economy that's too hot or growing too fast is a problem, but so is one that's cooling. To keep the economy humming along at moderate warmth, the government taxes, spends, borrows, prints money, and helps determine interest rates. How we tax and spend is called fiscal policy. How we control the supply of money by targeting interest rates and printing money is called monetary policy. Fiscal policy is set by Congress, but the president has some control too. Monetary policy is run almost entirely by government officials at the Federal Reserve System, the most powerful of whom the Board of Governors are appointed by the President for 14-year terms. The chair and vice chair are appointed by the board for 4-year terms. Any discussion of the American economy is inherently set against the backdrop of American biggest bust, the Great Depression, or 1930 to 1939. The causes of the Depression were many, and scholars still argue about them, but the Depression was precipitated by the stock market crash of 1929. Government borrowing and spending on World War I made it harder for the economy to recover. Some, including former Federal Reserve Chair Ben Bernanke, think that consumer debt was partly to blame too. In the 1920s, Americans borrowed heavily to buy houses and cars, and when the economy slowed down, they had to radically decrease their spending in order to meet their interest payments, leading to a major contraction in the economy. A drought and subsequent agricultural crises began in 1939 only made matters worse. The boom and bust cycle, of which the Depression was the ultimate bust, was common a century ago. In 1907, for example, the stock market fell 50%, and serious financial crises was averted by cash injection from the Treasury and by the swift action of private banker J.P. Morgan, who helped organize an effective national response known as the Panic of 1907. The crisis led to the creation of the Federal Reserve System in 1913, which through the Board of Governors and 12 Federal Reserve banks devises and implements most American monetary policy. The Federal Treasury Department is informally responsible for steering the value of the dollar internationally. The Federal Treasury Department and the Federal Reserve share an overarching goal: grow the economy, but not too quickly. We want more money, but we don't want to make too much too fast, because that can lead to bubbles, and those eventually pop, creating recessions, depressions, and panics. To grow the economy is to increase our national gross domestic product, or GDP, an estimation of how much value the country produces in a year. In 2011, 11 years ago, Americans' gross domestic product, or GDP, was estimated to be around $15 trillion. The largest of any single nation in the world, although the European Union has a collective gross domestic product that is now slightly higher. To provide some scale, $1 trillion is 1,000 billion, a million, or 1 trillion GDP, gross domestic product, can be measured in several different ways. So you might see slightly different numbers from different sources. Even more important may be gross domestic product growth. Measure every fiscal quarter, a period of 3 months, and expressed as a percentage of the gross domestic product. For most developed countries, anything over 3% growth per year is considered healthy. U.S. annual growth was around 4 or 5% during the late 1990s, which was considered a boom or a period of high growth, and under 2% in 2007, 2008. By contrast, China has achieved growth of 8 to 12% a year for 22 of the last 25 years. If gross domestic product levels off, we say there's stagnation. And my bus is coming now, so to be continued until tomorrow. All right, Puro Chapin. Yeah, man.